Right now, everywhere you turn in hip-hop, one name refuses to leave the conversation, and that name is Nicki Minaj. And I mean everywhere. Every timeline, every blog, every group chat, every argument between rap fans who swore they were done arguing, it always circles back to the same woman. Nicki Minaj. And what makes this whole thing genuinely wild is that while the entire internet is glued to a screen waiting on Nicki Minaj to make her next move, two of the biggest names in music history just tried to force the moment their way, and the numbers came in so brutal I almost didn't want to say them out loud. Beyonce dropped a song. Jay-Z redropped an album. And what happened next is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, because the receipts don't lie, the streaming platforms don't lie, and the audience just spoke louder than any interview or podcast ever could. So before we go one inch further, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you're brand new around here, and if you already know deep down that Nicki Minaj has been carrying a weight that a lot of these so-called legends couldn't hold for a weekend, go ahead and hype this video up like your favorite rapper's career depends on it. Because after tonight, I promise you, the way you look at Beyonce, Jay-Z, and Nicki Minaj is going to shift permanently. And here it is, plain and simple. Beyonce put out a track called Morning Blue. A surprise drop. A song aimed squarely at painting Jay-Z in a certain light, a provocative, deeply personal light that we're not even going to unpack in full tonight because that's a whole other conversation for a whole other video. And this song, from a woman who has been sold to the world as the untouchable queen of modern music, from the woman whose fans call themselves an entire hive, from the woman who has broken every record they could invent for her, from the woman who has stadium tours, luxury brand deals, magazine covers, and a marketing machine most artists could only dream of touching, this song opened with 438 streams. 438. That is not a typo. That is not a rounding error. That is not a first-hour count that later exploded. That is the raw number attached to a Beyonce release. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because for a catalog artist of her caliber, for someone who has been positioned as the female voice of a generation, for the same Beyonce who once had her fandom convinced she could break the internet by exhaling, that number is not a stumble. That is the audience quietly telling her something she does not want to hear. That is the marketplace speaking a language her stans have spent a decade trying to drown out. And listen, none of this happens in a vacuum. Because right at the same time, Jay-Z decided to re-release one of his catalog albums, one of those projects his stans will tell you is a stone-cold classic, one of those records they'll swear should be studied in universities, one of those albums whose Wikipedia page has been edited so many times by fans defending its legacy that the actual musical merits sometimes get lost in the noise. And that re-release moved 29,000 units. 29,000. From Jay-Z. From the man they call the greatest rapper alive on some blogs, the culture's chairman, the blueprint. 29,000. From a re-release of a supposed classic. And then, in the middle of that same window, without a single interview, without a single announcement, without a single marketing dollar going into an actual campaign, Nicki Minaj went into her own vault, pulled out Beam Me Up Scotty, a mixtape from years ago, not a new album, not a fresh single, not a rollout, not a strategy, just a mixtape that already existed, dusted it off, sent it back to streaming, and did nearly 100,000. Almost 4 times what Jay-Z pulled with a re-release of a project the culture insists is untouchable. On a mixtape that already lived on the internet for a decade before it ever hit official platforms. So the question I need somebody, anybody, to answer for me tonight is this. If Nicki Minaj is supposedly not on the same tier as Beyonce and Jay-Z, if Nicki Minaj is supposedly the woman everyone claims has fallen off, if Nicki Minaj is supposedly no longer the conversation, if Nicki Minaj is supposedly this washed-up figure clinging to relevance, then explain to me why her vault outperforms their brand new releases. Explain to me why the Pretender Queen can drop a full surprise record and get outsold by a Nicki Minaj mixtape from a different decade. Explain to me why the culture keeps whispering about Nicki Minaj at every dinner table in this industry while the crown they keep trying to weld onto Beyonce's head keeps slipping into the streaming charts and hitting the floor. Explain to me why an entire aligned press corps, an entire aligned stan army, an entire aligned publicity machine cannot manufacture the organic engagement that Nicki Minaj generates by simply existing. Because I'll say it, the numbers are the answer nobody in the mainstream press wants to admit out loud. The audience has already voted. The count has already happened. The receipts have already printed. And Nicki Minaj is winning a war that Beyonce and Jay-Z are pretending isn't happening. Now, before I keep going, I want to give a real quick shout out to the sponsor keeping this show alive tonight. If you're looking for a way to put a little extra money in your pocket without picking up a second job, check out the link pinned in the description. It's the same platform thousands of people are already using to knock out simple offers, quick surveys, and mobile games in their downtime and cash out to PayPal or gift cards. It's free to sign up. Takes about a minute. And once you're in, you'll wonder why you didn't start earlier. Handle that in a new tab and come right back, because we are just getting warmed up and the next section is going to make some of you delete Twitter for a week. Now, back to the fire. Because here is what I really want you to understand. Everything that has happened over the last stretch of the year has revealed a pattern. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every single time Jay-Z has an underwhelming moment, Beyonce conveniently appears with a release of her own. And every single time Beyonce has an underwhelming moment, the Jay-Z apparatus rolls out to try to reframe the story. Every single time one of them takes a public loss, the other one drops a surprise something to change the topic. It is a tag team. It is a marketing braid. It is two of the most powerful names in the industry taking turns propping each other up while the audience quietly checks out of the whole show. And I want you to actually count the pattern. Watch it over the last year. Watch it over the last 2 years. Watch how often Beyonce releases something within days of a Jay-Z story going bad. Watch how often Jay-Z resurfaces the moment a Beyonce narrative goes wobbly. It is not a coincidence. It is a coordinated brand defense system. Meanwhile, Nicki Minaj has not put out a new album in a long stretch, has not begged for anybody's attention, has not staged a single desperate rollout, and the entire genre is still bending itself in knots waiting for her to say something. Anything. A tweet. A caption. A snippet. A whisper. The internet will make it a trending topic before her voice even reaches the second syllable. And I need you to think about how strange that actually is. Because we are talking about a rap game where artists disappear for 6 months and the internet forgets they exist by month 3. We are talking about an industry that eats its own with a speed most people cannot comprehend. We are talking about an attention economy where every day you are not in the algorithm, somebody else is stealing your slot forever. And yet Nicki Minaj, a woman they have all sworn is finished, irrelevant, past her moment, replaced by a dozen new female rappers the industry keeps trying to prop up in her place, is the only name that will not let the culture move on. That is not a coincidence. That is not delusion. That is not even hype. That is gravitational pull. That is what a real superstar looks like when she stops chasing the algorithm and lets the algorithm chase her. That is what happens when a career is so built on genuine cultural weight that even silence generates streams. And here's the part that really pushes this whole thing even further into the fire. When Beyonce put out Morning Blue, she wasn't putting it out because she had something urgent to say to the world. She was putting it out because she needed to reclaim a story that Nicki Minaj had already been controlling for months. Remember when Nicki Minaj made her comments about Jay-Z's hairline? Remember when she said what everybody was already thinking about a certain lace situation? Remember the punchline that went viral before Beyoncé's PR team even had time to respond? What did Beyonce do? She grabbed a comb. She grabbed a tool. She pulled up a video, sat Jay-Z down, and combed his hair on camera for the entire internet to see. That was the response. Not a song. Not a bar. Not a mic drop. A grooming session. And the world was supposed to interpret that as a queen defending her king. But most of us watched it and saw a woman doing damage control for a man who couldn't defend himself against a single Nicki Minaj punchline. That was not a power move. That was a distress signal dressed up in a soft filter. And I want to be crystal clear, I am not one of the people who dismisses Beyoncé's catalog. I am not one of the people who dismisses Jay-Z's legacy. What they have built over the last 2 decades is real. What they have contributed is real. The stadium runs, the awards, the cultural moments, the business wins, real. But legacy is not the same as current relevance. Legacy is not the same as being able to compete in this moment, in this streaming era, in this attention economy where a 15-year-old on TikTok can move more units in a weekend than a legacy artist moves in a quarter. And right now, in this era, Nicki Minaj is doing something neither Beyonce nor Jay-Z can figure out how to do. She is holding the audience hostage without releasing a single note. She is dominating the algorithm without feeding it. She is trending without trying. And the moment she does release, this entire industry is going to tilt on its axis. Every executive knows it. Every rival artist knows it. Every blogger knows it. Every publicist in the building knows it. And Beyonce and Jay-Z, they know it most of all. That is why the rollouts keep coming. That is why the surprise drops keep happening. That is why the tag team keeps deploying. Because the silence coming from Nicki Minaj's camp is loud enough to shake stadiums and empty award show ballrooms at the same time. And I want to talk about that silence, because I think most people are misreading it entirely. There is a whole side of the internet that believes Nicki Minaj is stalling. That she's afraid. That she's out of ideas. That she's watching the culture pass her by and doesn't know how to respond. That she's been humbled behind closed doors and is scrambling to figure out what her next move even is. Let me be the one to tell you tonight, that read is completely upside down. Nicki Minaj is not stalling. Nicki Minaj is executing one of the most disciplined marketing plays this genre has seen in a decade. In an industry where every artist is terrified of being forgotten for a week, Nicki Minaj has weaponized her absence. She has turned not dropping into a form of dropping. She has turned waiting into a form of promotion. She has turned the empty space where an album should be into the loudest advertisement in modern music. Every day she doesn't release, the anticipation compounds. Every week she says nothing, the demand doubles. Every month she stays silent, the value of that first note goes up. And in my honest read, she is not moving on the timeline of a nervous artist. She is moving on the timeline of somebody who already knows how this ends and is willing to wait for the perfect frame. Because listen, Nicki Minaj said it herself. She does not move on peasant time. She moves on queen time. And I know that phrase gets thrown around a lot online, it gets memed, it gets clipped, it gets stripped of meaning, but tonight I want you to actually feel what queen time means. Peasant time is when you release because the label is scared. Peasant time is when you drop a surprise track because your husband's numbers came in flat. Peasant time is when you comb somebody's hair on camera because a rival made you look small. Peasant time is when you sprint back into the news cycle every time your brand takes a scratch. Queen time is when the entire genre organizes itself around your silence. Queen time is when your competitors have to spend their releases talking about you instead of talking about themselves. Queen time is when a mixtape from over a decade ago outperforms a fresh drop from the biggest woman in mainstream music. Queen time is when you can go months without a single verse and the culture still argues about you every single day. Nicki Minaj is on queen time. Beyonce is on damage control time. Jay-Z is on catalog rescue time. Those are three completely different clocks, and only one of them belongs to somebody actually in charge of the moment. And here is where I need to speak directly to the people in the comments who are going to argue with me about this. I already know some of you are typing right now. You want to tell me Beyonce's discography is untouchable. You want to tell me Jay-Z is the greatest rapper of all time. You want to tell me Nicki Minaj hasn't earned this seat at the head of the table. And I hear you. I really do. But I want you to check yourself on one thing. Every single one of you, whether you love Nicki Minaj or hate her, spend more time talking about her than talking about the artists you claim are bigger. You don't tweet about Beyonce's last 3 songs by name. You can't quote a Jay-Z verse from his last 4 features from memory. You spend your days debating what Nicki Minaj is going to do next. You spend your energy trying to convince strangers she is over. You spend your effort trying to prop up the tag team while the tag team quietly loses ground under your feet. And what you don't realize is that every single one of those arguments is free promotion for Nicki Minaj. She doesn't need a rollout when her doubters are running the campaign for her. She doesn't need to spend on advertising when her critics are the advertising. That is a level of cultural dominance most artists could never even accidentally achieve, and Nicki Minaj is doing it on purpose. Now I want to zoom back out for a second, because there is a bigger story underneath all of this, and it is one that a lot of hip-hop media is refusing to say clearly. This is not just a Nicki Minaj versus Beyonce situation. This is not just a Nicki Minaj versus Jay-Z situation. This is a shift in the entire power structure of black music. For 20 years, the throne belonged to the Carter family, and anybody in the mainstream who wanted to move product had to move through their orbit, the endorsements, the co-signs, the strategic alignment, the invisible tolls you paid to be allowed to compete at the highest level. That is just factually how the industry operated. But somewhere along the line, the audience started refusing that arrangement. Somewhere along the line, listeners started to notice the pattern. The surprise drops that landed with less impact each time. The re-releases that didn't move the needle. The stands that got quieter with every cycle. The blogs that stopped defending. The Grammys that felt less inevitable. The magazine covers that felt less iconic. And into that vacuum, the culture, organically, without a marketing budget, without a single television spot, without paying a single influencer, started asking one question over and over. Where is Nicki Minaj? When is Nicki Minaj dropping? What is Nicki Minaj going to say? And that question has become louder than any release the tag team can put out. That question has become bigger than any release the industry can manufacture to distract from it. And listen, I want to be responsible here, because I am not saying Beyonce is finished. I am not saying Jay-Z is done. I am not saying their next moves cannot succeed. Both of them are legends. Both of them have the resources, the connections, and the raw talent to engineer a comeback moment if they want one bad enough. What I am saying is that the era of being able to release something and have the world stop and worship it, that era is over for them. That era belongs to Nicki Minaj now. And it belongs to her precisely because she stopped begging for it. She stopped chasing it. She stopped playing the peasant time release games. And the moment an artist stops chasing the audience starts chasing the artist. That is a law of this business as old as the business itself. Beyonce forgot it. Jay-Z forgot it. Nicki Minaj remembered. And remembering the fundamentals when everybody else is chasing trends is exactly why she is going to walk out of this era with the crown intact while the tag team is still trying to explain the streaming numbers to their PR teams. So the real question tonight is not whether Nicki Minaj is going to drop. She will. The real question is not whether her album is going to be good. It will be. The real question is whether the industry that has spent the last year quietly trying to bury her, the tag team, the aligned press, the bought-off blogs, the discourse manipulators, the fake neutral podcasters, the algorithmic gatekeepers who keep pushing the challengers instead of the champion, whether that industry is ready for what happens when the silence ends. Because when Nicki Minaj finally opens her mouth, she is not walking into a fair fight. She is walking into a landscape she has already conquered. She is walking into a conversation she has already been dominating without saying a word. She is walking into a room where every single competitor has been talking about her for months and is now going to have to explain why she matters so much if she is supposedly irrelevant. And the receipts, the 438 streams, the 29,000 units, the 100,000 on a mixtape older than half her fanbase, those receipts have already written the ending of this story. All that is left is the last chapter, and Nicki Minaj is the only person in this whole industry who gets to decide when it drops. And I want to close with this, because it matters. Nicki Minaj does not need my defense. Nicki Minaj does not need anybody's defense. That is the whole point. The women and men who move on queen time never do. They just wait. They watch. They let the pretenders exhaust themselves. And when the moment is right, and only when the moment is right, they speak. That is the play Nicki Minaj is running right now, and it is working with a precision that most artists could not replicate if they studied it for years. And Beyonce and Jay-Z can drop another surprise song tomorrow, and another one next month, and another one after that, and it is not going to change the fundamental math of this moment. The audience has already made its choice. The streams have already told the story. The culture has already crowned the winner. It just hasn't gotten around to saying it out loud yet on the main stages. But the whispers are already there. The receipts are already there. The pattern is already there. And once you've seen it, you cannot unsee it, no matter how many press cycles try to sell you a different version of reality. But now you know. And now the comments know. And now the timeline knows. So let me hear it. Do you think Nicki Minaj is running the smartest silent campaign in modern music, or do you think the weight is starting to hurt her more than help her? Do you think Beyonce and Jay-Z are genuinely in decline, or is this a temporary dip that a real album cycle will fix? Do you think the tag team dynamic between Beyonce and Jay-Z is a legitimate love story or a coordinated brand strategy that finally stopped working? And are you personally ready to admit, publicly, on record, in the comments, that Nicki Minaj is currently the most important artist in the entire conversation, whether the mainstream press wants to say it or not? Drop your take below. I read every single one of them and I promise you the best comments end up quoted in the next video. Hit that like button if this hit you where it needed to hit. Subscribe if you're new around here, because we go this deep every single week and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Hype this video up in the algorithm, share it in the group chat, send it to the friend who still thinks Beyonce's numbers are unbeatable, send it to the cousin who still swears Jay-Z is untouchable, and let them argue with the math on their own time. Because a whole lot more is coming, and the next chapter of this story, the one about who actually controls the future of this genre, the one about which artist is quietly building the biggest comeback in modern music history, the one about who is really running the culture while the tag team keeps pretending they are, is dropping on this channel very soon. Until then, stay locked. Stay loud. And remember, Queen Time waits for nobody, and neither does Nicki Minaj.